Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment below and also subscribe to my channel. In today's video, we'll be making a simple off-shoulder bustier top. So I have my fabric folded into two already. We'll be cutting out the front panel first before we move to the back panel. So I folded my fabric using the biggest circumference of my upper body, which is my bust measurement. My bust measurement is 42 inches divided by 4. That is 10.5 inches. So I added additional 4 inches to it for seam allowance and joining. That is 14.5 inches. So I have 14.5 inches on fold. So for this part of the top, I will be cutting it using my half length measurement. My half length measurement is 17 inches. But since it's an off shoulder top, I took out 5 inches. You can see where I placed my tape roll, 5 inches above the full length of the top. So I added additional 1 inch at the base for joining, making it. So the first thing to do now is to draw out a starting line. So this line is going to be serving as our chest line and also our neckline. So draw out a starting line. So after drawing that, we're going to be placing the vertical measurement now. So because it's an off-shoulder top, I'm going to place my tape rule 5 inches above the starting line. The measurements we'll be needing our shoulder to bust measurements, shoulder to under bust measurements, and shoulder to waist measurements. So my shoulder to bust measurements is 10 inches. I'll go ahead and mark it. My shoulder to my under bust is 14 inches. And my shoulder to my waist measurements is 17 inches. And I'll be adding an additional 1 inch for joining. So I'll go ahead now and draw out horizontal lines on the points I marked. So I've gone ahead to draw out horizontal lines on all the points I marked. So I place my tape rule 5 inches above the starting line. So that is the starting line, the neckline. Then this is the bust line, the under bust line, and the waistline. So the next thing to do now is to place our dart measurements. So for the dart measurements, you measure your nipple to nipple. For me, that is 8 inches. 8 inches divided by 2. That is 4 inches. So I'm going to go ahead now and place 4 inches on all the lines. Mark 4 inches on the neckline. 4 inches on the bust line. 4 inches on the under bust line. And then 4 inches on the waistline. So go ahead now and use your ruler to connect all the points together, forming a straight line. So this line is going to serve as a guideline while we are placing our darts. So starting from the bust line, I'm going to place 1 inch on both sides of the line. So mark out 1 inch on both sides of the line. So I'll come down to my under bust line and I'll mark out 1.5 inch on both sides of the line. And on the waistline, I'll mark out 1 inch on both sides of the line. 1 inch on both sides of the line. So on the bust line, I'm going to come down by 1 inch. And I'm also going to go up by 1 inch from the line. We are doing this because so that when we connect the dart points together, we won't have a sharp edge, a sharp pointy edge on the bust line. So come up to the neckline now and take 1 inch on both sides of the line. The next thing now is to connect the points together. So from this part I marked below the bust line, I'm going to form a curve down to the under bust line. You can use a French curve to do this. So connect the other parts to meet the other line. Then from those 2 points, you draw a line to meet the waistline dart. I'll connect both points together. Then from the part where we marked at the upper line of the bust measurement, connect the dart to meet the 1 inch mark, forming a curve. So when we cut it out, the bust line won't have a sharp edge. So the next thing to do now is to place our horizontal measurement. So starting from my bust line, my bust measurement is 42 inches divided by 4, that is 10.5 inches. So I'll be adding additional 3 inches to it. I'll go ahead and mark it out. So on the other bust measurement, I'll be adding my dart, the dart measurement I'm going to cut out to it. So my other bust measurement is 36 inches divided by 4, that is 9 inches. But I have 3 inches of that I'm going to cut out, so I'm going to add it to it, that is 12 inches plus 1 extra inch, that is 13 inches. So I'll go ahead and mark 13 inches. On the waistline, I have 2 inches of that to cut out. My waist measurement is 38 inches divided by 4, that is 9.5 inches, plus the 2 inches of that is 11.5 inches, then 1 extra inch, then that is 12.5 inches. So I'll go ahead to mark 12.5 inches. The next thing now is to connect the points together. So I've connected all the points together. So for the neckline measurements, go ahead to place your tape rule on your chest line. For me, I have 12 inches. 12 inches divided by 2, that is 6 inches. So I'll go ahead now and use 6 inches as the wideness of my neckline. So don't forget we have about 2 inches that's on the neckline. So I'll take out 3 inches on the point before the dart, and I'll take out another 3 inches after the dart. So altogether I have about 8 inches. So by the time I close up the dart, I'll be left with my 6 inches neckline. So from that point, go ahead to form a curve and connect it to the bust line, forming the armhole curve. Connect it to the bust line. So the next thing to do now is to cut it out. So for the depth of the neckline, I'm going to come down by 1 inch on this piece. So depending on how deep you want it to be, you can use 1.5 inches, 2 inches, or you can as well just leave it straight that way. So I'll form a curve to connect the points together. So I'll cut it out now. And this is what it looks like. So before I open it up, I would go ahead and notch the bust point so as to make joining the pieces together easy. So I'll notch the bust point on the other piece of fabric. Then I'll go ahead and open them up. So after opening up the fabric, this is what it looks like. So before I go ahead to join it together, I'm going to cut out the back panel first. So the next thing to do is to cut out the back panel. So I've gone ahead to mark out the essential points like I did for the front panel. So I placed my tape rule 5 inches above the starting line. Then I marked out my bust measurement, which is 10 inches. My bust line 10 inches and my waistline 17 inches. And I added extra 1 inch to it for joining. The next thing to do now is to place our darts. So just like I did with the front panel, I'll be using 4 inches. So I'll place 4 inches on the bust line and I'll place 4 inches on the waistline. So the 2 inches mark is for my zipper allowance. So I'll come down by 1 inch from the bust line, and then I'll take 1 inch on both sides of the waistline from the point I mark. Then I'll connect the 2 points together. So this 2 inches point I marked out is going to serve as our zip allowance. That's the part we'll be fixing our zip. But the next thing to do now is to place our horizontal measurements. So my bust measurement is 10.5 inches and I'm adding additional 2 inches to it. That is 13.5 inches. Then I'll go over to my waistline. My waist measurement is 9.5 inches. Then I'll be taking out the 2 inches for that. That is 10.5 inches. Then I'll add additional 1 inch to it. That is 11.5 inches. Or let's say 12 inches. So I'll mark it on the allowance too. Then I'll connect the points together, forming a straight line. So for the neck width, I'll be maintaining the same 6 inches I used for the front panel. So I'll go ahead and mark 6 inches now. Then I'll connect it down to the bust line, forming the armhole curve. So to prevent our zip from bulging out, I'm going to come down to the under bust line, which is 14 inches. So from that 14 inches point I marked, I'm going to come in by half an inch. Go ahead and mark half an inch. Then I'll go over to the bust line and also come in by half an inch. Then I'll draw a line to connect the points together, forming a slant. So the reason why I'm doing this is to give our dress a very good fit at the back to avoid zip bulge. So after cutting it out, this is what it looks like. This is the zip allowance and this is the dart. So I'll go ahead now to close up the dart and finish up the armhole and neckline. So I've ironed the wording on the fabric. I'm going to be showing you guys how to do this in another video. So I'm going to go ahead now and connect the bust point where I notched. I'm going to mark it. I'm going to match it together. Then I'll take my pin and secure it. I'll take my pin and secure it. So I'll go ahead now and pin it together all the way to the bottom. I'll pin it down. So I've secured it with a pin, and the next thing I'm going to do now is to go to my sewing machine and sew it all the way. So I've gone ahead to join all the pieces together, and this is what it looks like. You can see the standing effect on the bust point already. You can see how beautiful it looks. So the next thing we're going to do now is to attach our lining to it. So I've gone ahead to cut out my lining and I joined it together. So I'm going to place the right side facing each other. So I'll place the right side of the lining on the right side of the top. Now I'll take it to my sewing machine using half an inch sewing allowance, and I'll run a straight stitch all the way. I'll run a straight stitch all the way around. So when I'm done with that, I'll turn it over to the other side and show you guys the next thing to do. So I've joined it together, and I'm going to turn it over now to the right side. So before I turn over, I made small notches on the wrong side of the top. That's to make turning over easier. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to top stitch on the wrong side of the top all the way down. So when I'm done top stitching the neckline, the next thing I will do, I'll go over to the back panel. I've closed up the darts, and I'll also be finishing the neckline with a bias strip. I won't be using a lining for the back panel. So what I'll do is that I'll place the right side facing each other this way, matching the armhole points together. Then I'll pin it all the way down. So after securing both sides using my pin, I'll mark out my horizontal measurement and then I'll sew it all the way down. So I'll come down now to the bust line to place the bust measurement. My bust measurement is 42 inches divided by 2, that is 21 inches. And I have 23 inches on, so I'll take out 1 inch on both sides of the top. So I'll come down to the waist, to the under bust line, which is 14 inches vertically. So my under bust measurement is 36 inches divided by 2, that is 18 inches. And I have about 21 inches here, so I'll go ahead now and mark 1 inch on both sides. So on my waistline, my waist measurement is 36 inches divided by 2, that is 19 inches. And I have 21 inches. So I'll go ahead and mark 1 inch on both sides. So I'll connect the points together now, forming a line. So that's the line I'll be sewing on when joining the sides together. So I'll also I'll also top stitch the front panel, then I'll finish up the neckline of the back panel with the bias strip. I'll do it for the other side and I'll show you guys the next thing to do when I'm done. So I've joined both sides together and this is what it looks like. I also went ahead to top stitch the neckline of the front panel, then I finished up the neckline of the back panel using a bias strip. Next thing to do now is to cut out our sleeve. I have this fabric cut out already. It's 13.5 inches wide. It's in a fold of 2, and in length it's 9 inches in length. So 1 inch at the top is going to go for elastic casing, and another 1 inch at the base is going for elastic casing. So I have left with 7 inches for the sleeve length. So what I'm going to do now is to take my top, then I'll place the armhole on the open side of the fold. So I left 1 inch gap at the top for the elastic, and I also left half an inch at the side for joining the sleeve. So what I'll do now is to trace out the armhole. So this is what it looks like. I'll go ahead now and cut it out. So I'll repeat the same thing for the other sleeve. So I'll use this sleeve now to cut out the second sleeve. So I have my sleeves cut out already. So I'll go ahead now and open it up. Then I'll go to the top and fold it by ½ inch first, then another ½ inch again, and I'll sew it all the way to the other side. I'll be passing in an ½ inch elastic. This elastic is 8 inches in length. So if you don't know how to pass elastic through this, you can watch my other video. I will put the link in the description box on how to pass an elastic. So I'll repeat the same thing for the other side. For the other sleeve, I'll fold in the base by ½ inch first and another ½ inch, and sew it all the way to the other side. So when I'm done with that, I'll show you guys what it looks like. So I've gone ahead to fold and insert the elastic for the sleeve. So for the base of the sleeve, I used 10 inches in length of elastic, and I also closed up the side. So the next thing to do now is to attach the sleeve to the top. So I'll be placing the right side of the sleeve on the right side of the top. Then I'll match the points where I joined the sleeve together to the points where I joined my top. I'm going to use my pin now to secure it together. So I'll match the points where you join the sleeve to the points where you join the top. Then I'll use my pin to hold it down. Then I'll go ahead and pin it all the way to the other sides. After joining with the pin, I take it to your sewing machine now and then sew it all the way to the other side. So this is what it will look like after sewing. So I'll go ahead and repeat the same thing for the other side of the sleeve. Right side facing each other, then match the points you joined together. So I'll take it over to my sewing machine now and I'll sew it all the way. So when I'm done with that, I'll show you guys the next thing to do. So I finished attaching the sleeve to the top and you can see how beautiful it looks. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to measure out the full length of the base, because I'll be using another fabric to form pleats on it. So I'll take my tape rule now and measure it out. So I have about 38 inches there, then I multiply it by 2, that is 76 inches. So I have this fabric cut out already. The fabric is 7 inches in width. Fabric is 7 inches wide. I went ahead to secure the base already using 1/2 inch. Then the fabric is 76 inches long. So the next thing to do now is to place the right side of the top facing the right side of the fabric. Place the right side facing each other. So place the right side facing each other, take it to your sewing machine. While attaching the fabric to the top, you keep forming small pleats, just like I'm showing you. You make small pleats and sew it all the way down to the other side. So I'm also going to finish up the back panel with a zip. Then I'll show you guys what the finished product of the top looks like. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.